Shalom, everyone. This is Nathaniel, and we're going to do our Tuesday Bible study. We missed a week, so we're going to be trying to make up for a little bit of lost time. And we're still in the book of Ezekiel. We're going to be looking this evening at Ezekiel chapter 33. We're going to start there. The focus of this evening's study is to review what Ezekiel's charge was, which is why we're starting in 33. But we're going to be spending most of our time looking at the individuals and groups in chapters 34 and 35. All of this is in anticipation of when we get into Ezekiel chapter 37, which is where we're going to be spending a significant amount of time. So let me go ahead and we'll get started by sharing my screen. Okay, so when we first began the Ezekiel study, if you were to look at Ezekiel, the first, second, and third chapters, the prophet was given a vision of the Most High. He was given the vision of those living creatures, but he was also given his charge, and that was found in Ezekiel chapter 3. So when we start in Ezekiel chapter 33, he gets his charge from the Most High one more time. And it says, starting at verse 1, "Again the word of Yahuwah came unto me, saying, Son of man, speak to the children of your people, and say unto them, when I bring the sword upon a land, if the people of the land take a man of their coasts, and set him for their watchman, and when he sees the sword come upon the land, he blows the trumpet and warns the people, then whoever hears the sound of the trumpet and does not take warning, if the sword come and take him away, his blood shall be upon his own head. He heard the sound of the trumpet and took not warning. His blood should be upon his own head, but if the watchman sees the sword come and does not blow the trumpet, and the people be not warned, if the sword come and take any person from among them, he is taken away in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at the watchman's hand. So you, son of man, I have set you a watchman unto the house of Israel. Therefore you shall hear the word of my mouth, and warn them from me. When I say unto the wicked, O wicked man, you shall surely die, if you do not speak to warn the wicked from his way, that wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at your hand. Nevertheless, if you warn the wicked of his way, to turn from it, if he do not turn from his way, he shall die in his iniquity, but you have delivered your soul." That is almost verbatim what Ezekiel was told in Ezekiel chapter 3 when he was first given his commission. So as we move through the lesson this evening, we're going to be looking at the that idea. So what we just read, that chapter again retells, chapter 33 retells the word that was given to Ezekiel in chapter 3. And it in essence says that the Most High's dealings are just. He does prophesy about, what he's being told is to tell his people what's going to happen to them. And what was going to happen to them was that Jerusalem was going to be destroyed because of the sin of the people. And he's also given the remnant and what the remnant is supposed to be understanding as they are in captivity. Some of the people were not completely destroyed. Some of them were actually taken captivity. So that's what. That's why we're starting in Ezekiel chapter 33. Now, this becomes important to us because of the fact that we are living in similar times. So I want to cover we're going to go to the idea of what Ezekiel was telling actually it was the leadership, because most of the people that Ezekiel was around when they were in captivity in Babylon were people from the leadership class. And so that's why we were also looking at, let me share the screen one more time. We were looking at this prophecy against the leaders in chapter 34. Now, we're not going to read chapter 34, but in essence, what chapter 34 says is that the leaders are going to be held accountable for their misusing their position of leadership. And so this is actually in response to the commandment or the charge that Ezekiel was given. Ezekiel was from the priestly class. He was from the priestly line. And it was the priestly line that the Most High used to give his will to his people and to administer what the Most High's will for the people was. They were not only to work in the temple and sacrifice for sins, but they were actually the keepers of the oracles of the Most High. And it was those people that everyone in the community of Israel, everyone in the nation of Israel looked to for their leadership. And so by the time we get to Ezekiel's charge and the fact that Jerusalem is now being destroyed, part of the reason it's being destroyed is because of the leaders. So that's what we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about as well. And that's where chapter 34 comes in, because he prophesies specifically against the leaders, as he's told. And what the leaders are told is, you have been feeding yourselves off the Most High's flock, but you haven't been feeding the flock. And therefore the people that you have been given charge over have been scattered on the earth because of the fact that the shepherds were ungodly. And I'm looking at this right here. Let me make that a little bit bigger. Okay. And so not only were the people scattered, but the Most High was going to judge the leaders because the people had been scattered, and it was their responsibility to take care of the flock. So the Most High is eventually going to restore the flock, which means that he is going to bring the flock out of all the places that they've been scattered and bring them back to Israel. And those lost he's going to look for those lost and find them. And that's, if you remember in Luke chapter 19 verse 10, it talks about that, how the good shepherd goes and looks for his lost sheep. And then once that happens, then his kingdom, the real kingdom, is going to be established. But all this comes about as Ezekiel is talking to the leaders who have already been brought captive into Babylon, why they're there, and the consequences of what they're there for. And the reason that is important as we go forward in the study, this has all been prophesied before even Ezekiel was born. This is the kind of thing that was going to happen to the nation of Israel and it was stated in Deuteronomy in several places, but specifically in Deuteronomy chapter 28, which we talked about, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on that, just to remind us that we did talk about what happens when a people who are called by the name of the Most High operate in His will, and what happens to those same people when they operate outside of His will. But even when they're operating outside of His will, the Most High never lets His people do that without a strong witness against their actions. And that's who Ezekiel was. So just like as in Deuteronomy chapter 28, when Moses tells the people, if you do what the Most High tells you to do, then you're going to receive all these blessings. But if you don't do what the Most High tells you to do, then all these curses are going to accrue to you. And the very things that would have been your blessings now will become your curses, even to the point of returning into the house of bondage again. And that's where the chapter ends up. Now, there is a theme that is going throughout the scripture. Ezekiel is, as we go forward in the lesson this evening, he's going to be talking about that theme specifically as it relates to not only God's people, but also those who are not God's people. And so the theme is basically that there are two natures that scriptures describe. There's the nature of the righteous, and there's the nature of the wicked. This begins in Genesis. If you remember, in our study in Genesis, at the 3rd chapter, the woman is said that her seed, the seed of the woman, was going to bruise the head of the seed of the serpent. And so there's these two seeds that can be found throughout Scripture from Genesis to Revelation. We know that the seed of the woman, or let me suggest to you if you didn't consider this, the seed of the woman is actually Jesus. And the seed of the serpent is actually that which is against Jesus, or Satan. But that plays itself out in human terms. So the first time it plays itself out is with Cain and Abel. So Abel was the seed of righteousness. Cain became the seed of the wicked. And then when we look at Isaac, Isaac was the seed of the righteous because the Most High's will was going to be done through him. Ishmael was also a brother. Both of them were Abraham's sons, but Ishmael was not a seed of the promise. So Ishmael finds himself in the category of the seed of the wicked. And so when we get down to Jacob and Esau, it's the same thing. That's in Genesis chapter 25. Jacob becomes the righteous, and Esau becomes the product of wickedness. Jacob's name gets changed to Israel. Esau's name gets changed to Edom. So, and then of course we know about Moses and Pharaoh, David and King Saul, and then finally Yeshua and sorry about that misspelling, and the adversary, which again is Satan. But these two natures are all the way through scriptures. So when we are looking at our study for this evening, the other person that we're looking at besides the other people group that we're looking at besides the children of Israel, and let me just say this too, even though the children of Israel were at this point in time outside of the will of the Most High, and let me go back to this too, because this whole thing about righteousness, it doesn't come from the individuals. It comes from the individuals in their relationship to righteousness. So all of these individuals have been wicked, just like these individuals have been wicked over the course of time, but based on their response to the Most High, then He gives them their righteousness. So when we get to looking at Ezekiel chapter 35, because in Ezekiel chapter 33, the first thing that's mentioned again is, or what is mentioned is what the people who are supposed to be righteous have done with their righteousness, which was to pollute it and allow themselves to be corrupted. And it started with their leaders. So the Most High always starts with the people who are supposed to be called by his name, or actually not supposed to be, who are called by his name. So his people have to be right before other people can get right. So that happens first. But then when we get to the 35th chapter, now he's starting to talk about the enemies of his people who are supposed to be righteous, and Edom comes up again. And so in Ezekiel chapter 35 and 36, this is just like Israel was being judged, that there's also the judgment of Israel's enemies, even though the enemies were used by the Most High to bring judgment onto Israel. So Edom, again, as we were looking at here, is actually the brother of Jacob. The Edomites are descendants of Esau, the twin brother, not just brother, but the twin brother of Jacob. Okay, so it was the twin brother then who, if you were to look at a map, Edom and Israel are fairly closely in proximity, are in fairly close proximity to one another. So Edom also lived in the mountains of Seir. And that's why in Ezekiel chapter 35, Edom is referred to as Mount Seir, and Edom is going to be judged. And the reason that they're going to be judged is because they have this perpetual hatred of Israel. We didn't look at the scripture in Genesis chapter 25 closely. Actually, yeah, we should do that. So, let's see. Let me do it this way. Okay, so we're going to look at Genesis chapter 25. Now, we're going to start at verse 21. It says, and Isaac, let me make this a little bit bigger also. And Isaac have to get to it again. Isaac entreated the Most High for his wife because she was barren. And the Most High was entreated of him, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. They were having trouble having children. So Isaac asked the Most High to allow his wife to become fruitful. And then in verse 22 it says, and the children struggled together within her. So she had twins in her body. And she said, if it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of Yahuwah. And Yahuwah said to her, and here's what we're looking at, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from your bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. So that's what we're looking at when we look at, okay, let me take this back. That's what we're looking at when we're looking at this situation here with Edom and Israel. The nation that was the stronger nation at that point in time, and I would suggest to you this is still going on to this day, by the way. The stronger nation is Edom and the Edomites. The weaker or the lesser in strength is Israel. But in the long run, Israel is going to be the nation that rules over his brother. Okay, so that has been prophesied, and Ezekiel is seeing the same thing And so when he prophesies to the mount of to the mountains of Edom or Mount Seir, he's telling them the reason why they're going to be judged. Because Edom, although he was the firstborn, or Esau, although he was the firstborn, he sold his birthright, and he sold his birthright to his brother. And once he did that, then he lost his birthright. And so from that point on, Esau is trying to get his birthright back. And that's why he's so jealous about, at that point, Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. That is still going on. So Esau was elated when the Babylonians came in and destroyed Jerusalem, because that meant that he could now have the inheritance that he was supposed to have. And so that's what this is talking about. And once we pick that story up in Ezekiel chapter 35. So this hatred that he had for his twin brother is a perpetual hatred. And that hatred was spoken to while they were still in the womb. So the Most High knew all of these things were going to be happening. So although he used Esau or Edom to punish Jacob or Israel, and more specifically at this point, Jerusalem, because that's where the southern kingdom was, because he used Edom to be one of those who were punishing them, that did not give Edom the right to do the things against his own brother that he was doing. Okay, so their desire was to overtake both Israel and Judah and make that territory theirs, talking about the land of promise. And today the prophecy is being played out even today as the children of the Edomites have taken control over the land of Israel and have called it theirs, just like they were doing. And there's going to come a point in time when the Most High is not going to allow that to continue. Okay, so that's the prophecy that was given against Ezekiel. I'm sorry, against Edom. Now Ezekiel also prophesies to Israel that though their enemies have made them desolate and swallowed them up on every side, so that the heathen would possess not only the land but the people as well, and that everyone would despise Israel, it was going to be the Most High that would bring Israel back. And so that's what chapter 36 is talking about. Okay, so once we get to chapter 36 in Ezekiel chapter 36, let me turn to that right quick. Okay. Ezekiel is then again told to prophesy unto the mountains of Israel and say to the mountains of Israel, hear the word of the Most High. So even though Israel and Judah have been overrun, he's now given this prophecy, and he says Yahuwah has already spoken against Idumea. By the way, Idumea is a version of Edom. So Idumea is actually the people group that are the Edomites, and the territory that the Edomites had taken over, okay, which didn't belong to them. Okay, so that area, once the Babylonians came in, was called Idumea. So you're looking at the name Esau is Edom, and it's also Idumea. Okay, and so Idumea being another word for Edom, which is another word for Esau, the Most High is again prophesying that he has lifted up his hand, and now these people are going to bear their shame, and Israel is going to shoot forth branches and yield fruit, and the Most High is going to say, I'm for you, and you shall be tilled and sown. You will be brought back to your old estate. So this is in essence a prophecy of how Israel is going to be restored. And he says that these things will all be done not for the sake of Israel, but for the sake of his name. And he's going to sanctify that name that we, talking about the children of Israel, have profaned among the heathen. And so Yahuwah will take the children of Israel out from the heathen and gather us from out of all the countries where we were scattered. He'll give us a new heart of flesh to take away the heart of stone, and then Israel will remember their own evil ways, loathe themselves, and that is found in Zechariah chapter 12, verse 10, and their land will become like the Garden of Eden. So in the midst of Ezekiel, because, actually a little bit further into Ezekiel, we're in chapter 36 right now, he's telling the children of Israel, I'm going to put you back where I had you in the first place. And this is probably a good time for us to remind ourselves. I'm going to go all the way back up. Okay, to this slide here. So, Ezekiel, remember we were talking about Ezekiel at a glance. The first three chapters are about Ezekiel the prophet and his commission. We just referenced that at the beginning. But then chapters 4 through 24 are all about the judgment that the Most High is bringing upon Judah specifically, or the southern tribes, Judah, Benjamin, and actually Levite was in there too, because the Levites were still in Jerusalem carrying out their priestly duties. So chapters 4 through 24, that's 20 chapters of here's what's going to happen to you and here's why it's happening to you. Okay, so for 20 chapters he goes through that in Ezekiel, starting at Ezekiel chapter 4 and going all the way up through Ezekiel chapter 24. Then he talks about, and let me finish that thought too. So in those chapters, all of this judgment that is coming upon Judah is being executed by those who are not Israelites. They are the enemies of Israel, Babylon being one of them, but all the other nations around them are also their enemies. So he uses other nations to bring judgment on his people. Now, once he's done that, then chapters 25 through 32 talk about how the Most High's judgment on the nations that came against Israel is also going to take place. So even though Israel was judged for their disobedience and their rebellion, the nations that did the judging, that the Most High used to judge, were also going to be judged. Okay, so whether you were the Most High's people or whether you weren't the Most High's people, judgment is coming on both of those. So in chapters 4 through 24, it's on Judah, and then from chapter 25 through 32, which is the chapter right before we picked up this evening, that's judgment on the nations. Now, as we go into 33, which we did. Okay, let me do it this way. As we go into 33, we're beginning now to see that the Father is going to restore Israel, but not because of anything that Israel's done, and therefore those people who came against Israel are going to be judged. Okay, so that's how we get to Ezekiel 36. So in Ezekiel 36, he's letting the children of Israel know, not because of you, but because of me, I'm going to restore you as a people, and I'm going to bring you back to the land that I kicked you out of because you were living an ungodly life and profaning my name, to the point that even your worship was a stench in my nostrils. So all of that is what's going on when we're looking at Ezekiel, okay? Up to this point in time, up to chapter 36. So that is a very, very long background into where we're going to be spending most of the rest of our time, which is in Ezekiel chapter 37. Now, this chapter we're going to read. Let me pull that up. Okay. So we're going to look at Ezekiel chapter 37, and we're going to start reading at verse 1. Okay, Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 1. The hand of Yahuwah was upon me and carried me out in the spirit of the Most High, or Yahuwah, and set me down in the midst of the valley which was full of bones, and caused me to pass by them round about, and behold, there were very many in the open valley, and lo, they were very dry. And he said unto me, Son of man, can these bones live? And I answered, O Lord, or O Master, Elohim, you know. Now, we're going to pause there for just a second to, again, give the context. Ezekiel is in captivity, having prophesied to other people who were Israelites, who were in captivity in Babylon, that Jerusalem was getting ready to be destroyed once again. Now, that happened 3 times during the course of this negative interaction between between Israel and Babylon. Okay, so this was the final time. But each one of those times when they were in conflict with Babylon, they were in conflict militarily. Okay, and so the second time when Ezekiel is prophesying, he's telling the people, it's getting ready to happen again because you all will not follow the Most High. What they had been doing, and one of their kings at that particular point in time was leading the charge. They wanted to rely on Egypt to help them out, and help them out to such a degree that they could be out from underneath the thumb of the Babylonians. And so Babylon then came against them one more time, but each time that Babylon came against them, they came against them militarily, and people died. So Israel had an army. It had a large army. And so when Ezekiel is seeing this vision, because he was carried out in the spirit to the midst of the valley, these bones were the army that had been destroyed in battle. All right. So when he's asked, can these bones live? The question is obviously the answer, if you're looking at dead people and the fact that they've been dead so long that you can actually see their bones, the answer is going to be, of course not. But the Spirit is teaching Ezekiel something, and that's what we're going to be looking at. So going now into verse 4, again he said to me, let me read 3 again. He said, Son of man, can these bones live? And I answered, O Master, you know. Again he said to me, prophesy upon these bones and say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of Yahuwah. Ezekiel was a prophet. And if you remember his assignment was to be a watchman on the wall, telling the people when destruction was coming. And if he told them and they heeded the instructions and they heeded the call, they would be saved. If he told them and they didn't heed the call, they would be condemned or perish, but he would save his own soul. Okay, so Ezekiel is very familiar with prophesying, because the prophesying that he did, figuratively speaking, was to people who were dead people, because it was just a matter of time before they were going to be wiped out. And so that was his job, was to prophesy, you're getting ready to be wiped out, you need to repent. All right, so now he's told to prophesy on those bones and say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of Yahuwah. Well, what's the word been up to this point in time? I'm going to destroy you because of your disobedience, but I'm going to bring you back. That's always been the prophecy. Okay, so that's why it's a good thing for us to see Ezekiel in its entirety, because not only are the children of Israel being told, because of your unrighteousness you're going to be destroyed, but regardless, those who did destroy you, I'm going to deal with them too, and I'm going to bring you back. But I'm not going to bring you back for your sake. I'm going to bring you back for my sake. And before the lesson's over this evening, we're going to talk a little bit about what his sake is. So he said, thus says Yahuwah unto these bones, behold, I will cause breath to enter into you, and you shall live. In other words, he's going to breathe the breath of life into them. Okay, not Ezekiel. Ezekiel is just telling the bones. Okay, but the bones will be responding to that which causes life, and that is the Most High. And so then he says, and I will lay sinews upon you, and will bring up flesh upon you, and cover you with skin, and put breath in you, and you shall live. And you shall know that I am Yahuwah. So I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I prophesied, there was a noise, and behold, a shaking, and the bones came together, bone to his bone. And when I beheld, lo, the sinews and the flesh came upon them, and skin covered them above, but there was no breath in them. So just by him speaking the words of the Most High, that's how powerful the words of the Most High is. The words of the Most High cause that which is dead to start assembling itself. Kind of like what happened in the Garden of Eden. When man was formed or made of the dust of the ground, what were these bones? What was this flesh? What was these sinews? That's nothing but dust. And so he's actually causing the dust to reassemble, okay, just by saying, hear the word of the Most High. I will cause breath to enter into you, and you shall live. So Ezekiel is not saying, listen to me and you can come back to life. He's saying, bones, dead things, listen to the words of the Most High. The Most High said, I'm going to cause breath to enter in you, and you shall live. So the you that's being entered into is first being reassembled. And now we're going to talk a little bit about why we're even looking at Ezekiel. Because this is the same thing that's going on right now. The bones are coming together, the sinews are coming together based on the word of the Most High, based on those who will boldly prophesy that bones, you are going to have life in you again. And so once he says what he is given to say, then he watches these things come to pass, and what he sees is that as he was prophesying, a noise takes place, and a shaking takes place, and the bones come together, bone to bone. And then he sees sinews and flesh come upon them, and the skin covered them. But as the scriptures say, but there was no breath in them. So after he's told that, then the Spirit says in verse 9, then he said unto me, prophesy unto the wind. If you look up that word wind, it's ruach. Okay, it's the same word as what we call the ruach hakodesh, or the holy wind, and that is what hovered over the face of the waters in Genesis chapter 1. So he said to me, prophesy unto the wind, prophesy, son of man, and say to the wind, thus says Yahuwah Elohim, come from the four winds, O breath, or ruach, and breathe upon these slain that they may live. So the thing that brings the slain back to life is the word, and it's the wind. The word is the wind is the word, because that's what was prophesied. So the life is in the wind. When we inhale, we are inhaling life, which then gets distributed through our blood, because the life is in the blood, to the rest of the body, so that the body can function and live the way that it's supposed to live. If we're not taking in life, life cannot sustain us. So at this point, Ezekiel prophesies to the wind, and it's the wind that comes and breathes upon the slain that they may live. And then he says, so I prophesied as he commanded me, and breath came into them, and they lived and stood upon their feet, an exceeding great army. See, that's how we know who this was. The very army that was destroyed by the Babylonians is now on its feet again, with the breath of life again, and it is an exceeding great army. That exceeding great army was defeated before, now it's been resurrected. So, now we can either speculate on what all of this has to do with us, or we can read on in verse 11 and learn what the Spirit says to him. Then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. Behold, they say, our bones are dried, and our hope is lost. We are cut off for our parts. So, the Spirit is telling Ezekiel, here's what you're looking at. Okay, so he doesn't have to ponder it. The Spirit gives him exactly what he is looking at and why he's looking at it. So he's told, the prophet is told, what your vision is the vision of the house of Israel. Not just some of Israel, the whole house of Israel. In other words, the 10 tribes who are in the north called Israel, but also the 2 tribes in the south who were called Judea. And he's speaking about the entire house, because Israel is supposed to be 12 tribes, not just 10. Okay, and certainly not just 2. So he's letting Ezekiel know that deadness that he's looking at is the whole house of Israel. And is the whole house of Israel is actually speaking even though it's dead. And this is where I wanted to try to relate these scriptures to where we are in our day and time. It says, our bones are dried, our hope is lost, we are cut off for our parts. That is the statement of a people who have no hope. And when a people have no hope, that's the same as being dead. If you're dead, Scripture says the dead know nothing. In order to know anything, you have to be alive. So, this is an analogy of a people group. Well, what does it mean our hope is lost? It means that no matter what we do, no matter where we turn, no matter how hard we try, nothing works out for us. People don't accept us. They don't see us as human beings. They see us as monkeys. They see us as beasts. They even write in their books that that's what we are. And some of the they claim to be Christians. So this hope that's lost cuts us off. And it says we are cut off for our parts. That also has to do with the fact that we are divided. There is no unity. Not only that, we cannot bring unity because we're dead and we don't know how to do it. And so the result of being dead is not having enough. The result of being dead is that our children are in the streets killing each other. The result of being dead is that when we do get something, those who are in power take it from us by force. All of that is the result of being dead. So at the end of the day, there is no hope. We are lost and we are cut off. So the prophet then is told, therefore in verse 12, therefore prophesy and say unto them, thus says Yahuwah Elohim, behold, O my people, I will open your graves and cause you to come out of your graves and bring you into the land of Israel. And you shall know that I am Yahuwah when I have opened your graves, O my people, and brought you out of your graves. So the Spirit tells us in an analogy, okay, that our state, not only are we dead, but we're all in our graves. And the job of the prophet is the same job that Yeshua had when he called Lazarus out of the grave. He said, Lazarus, come forth. And that's because when he speaks, there's power to raise the dead. And so what the Most High is saying is when I give you these words, I'm giving you the power to raise the dead out of their graves. We're going to pause for just a second. Before the Spirit has been spoken over those bones, the scriptures say that there is a great shaking and there is a lot of noise and the coming together bone to bone. Okay? But there's no life in them. I would submit to you that's where we are right now. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of we woke now conversation. But our actions indicate that we're still dead. Because as woke as we may be, there is no unity. And Therefore, we are still cut off for our parts. So the Spirit has to speak to us. But it was the Spirit speaking, and it is the Spirit speaking, that has gotten us to the point where we are right now. At least we're seeing indications that words of life are being prophesied over us, being spoken over us. And so so the thing that happens is the same thing that happened with Lazarus. When Yeshua called him, Lazarus heard the voice of Yeshua. Now, if Yeshua had just said, "Come forth," everybody that was in the grave would have come out. That's how much power he has. But he spoke specifically to Lazarus. And so therefore it was Lazarus that came forth. And that's what the Most High is telling his people now. You are called by my name. Okay. Once you know your name, then when I call you, that's going to raise you up out of your grave, and you will no longer be dead. And so again, in verse 13, and you shall know that I am Yahuwah when I have opened your graves, O my people, and brought you out of your graves, and shall put my spirit in you, and you shall live, and I shall place you in your own land. Then shall you know that I, Yahuwah, have spoken it and performed it, says Yahuwah. So it's all about what the Most High says. The prophet's job is to just speak what the Most High says, because the prophet has no power in and of him or herself. The power is in the word of the Most High. And it's the word of the Most High that tells his people it's time to wake up. It's time to get up. It's time to be the army that you were created to be. It's time to live and move and have your being, because that is what my will for you is. Ezekiel, and we're going to stop right there for this evening. Ezekiel is in captivity. I have to keep emphasizing that. He's already in the grave, so to speak. Okay? He's in the land of his captivity. And it's in the land of his captivity that the word of the Most High comes and tells him, here's what I want you to tell the other people who are in captivity, and also those who are on their way to be in captivity. They're not right, and they will pay for their disobedience. But there's coming a point in time when I'm going to restore my people. And it's not going to be because of their righteousness. It's going to be so my name will be glorified. When you look across the planet and you ask the question, what people could this possibly be? I'll leave that up to you to determine based on what you see and what you see in the Word, who that people is. But whoever it is, it's those who are the despised. Not just of one geographical location, not just at one geographical location, but wherever they are, they're despised. And wherever they are, that's where the Most High is going to be bringing them from whence they are to where they're supposed to be. And it will be for a specific purpose, to bring glory to his name. Okay? So, we'll stop there. We left it off at Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 14. Father willing, we'll pick up at Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 15. The word of the Most High is quick, it's active, it's sharp as a two-edged sword. It cuts asunder the soul from spirit, the marrow from the bone. It is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of our hearts. That's true with us as individuals. That's also true with us as people groups. We can fool ourselves, but we don't fool him. He knows who we are, and he knows his plans for us. That's why this is a good scripture for us to end on is Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 11, which says, I know the plans that I have for you, says the Most High. Plans for good and not for evil, so that you would have a future and a hope. Those are his plans for us. Our challenge is to receive that and to operate in that blessing so that his name is glorified. We'll say shalom, and should the Father give another appointed time for us to meet, we will do that in Yeshua's name.